So welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to our lecture series called Daily News and Shorts. In this lecture series, we cover a particular day's current affairs in a very short span of time. Now, just watching this lecture would be job half done because just after watching it, you need to revise it as well. Otherwise, you'll quickly forget all these current affairs. Okay, so just watching this lecture is job half done. Remember that. Okay. Now, let's begin today's discussion. But first, let's take a look at the list of topics that we shall cover today. Okay, so let's begin. Daily current affairs, 8th of August, Friday, and here is the list of topics. So number one on this list is use of biochar as carbon sink. Government is trying to promote biochar, which will not only help us fight against climate change, it will also help us help us with management of waste in a sustainable manner. Okay, waste generation is a big problem, so we'll be able to manage waste in a sustainable manner using biochar. So we'll talk about this. Then, well, many people are saying that these recent flash floods in Uttarkashi district of Uttarakhand were also the result of glacial lake outburst floods. Okay, so what is GLOF, glacial lake outburst? Okay, how does it cause flooding, and how much or how many places are there in India which are vulnerable to this threat? Okay, so we'll talk about this issue. Then we'll talk about the issue of Rohingyas because a case is in Supreme Court. And Supreme Court will take a call whether Rohingyas would be classified in Indian law as refugees, and if yes, then what rights and privileges they have. Okay, currently they are not categorized as refugees. So we'll talk about what are refugees, who are refugees, what is the official definition of refugees, and what are the rules and regulations with respect to illegal migrants in India. Okay, and in the end we'll talk about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, basically this news item is related to USA, but the concept of gerrymandering is also relevant for India. So we'll talk about this American concept, okay, and its relevance in India, and how does India protect its democracy from gerrymandering. We'll talk about this issue. Basically, we'll try to explore what gerrymandering is. You learn a new word, new concept today, okay. So these are the four topics that we shall zero in our attention on. Let's start discussing them one by one, starting with use of biochar as a carbon sink. Okay, now you see in India, well, India is known for its population, right? We all know about it. Now, urban areas also suffer from this problem of high population. Rural areas also suffer from this problem of high population. Now, because of this problem of high population, well, there is a lot of waste that gets generated in urban areas especially, okay? India is basically victim to a lot of waste generation, right? Now, all this waste that is generated in most of the cities of India, well, how is it disposed of? Most of the times it's burnt or buried in landfills. Now, when it is burnt, the waste generated, the organic waste that is generated, when it is burnt, it releases poisonous, toxic gases that cause air pollution. So, air pollution is one problem. The other problem is that it also releases a lot of greenhouse gases, especially methane, okay, which is contributing towards global warming. So sustainable waste management is of utmost importance for India, right? Because burning of waste causes air pollution, causes global warming. Now there is one chemical or one product that can basically help us with this sustainable waste management, and that is biochar. Now, what is biochar basically? When you burn organic waste, okay, when you burn agricultural waste, when you burn solid municipal waste, basically organic waste. So, when you burn organic waste without the presence of oxygen, in the absence of oxygen, then a charcoal-like product is produced that is called biochar, okay. So, when you burn organic products in the absence of oxygen, biochar is produced. And biochar has some special qualities. Biochar, when applied to soil, well, it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere, thereby fighting against climate change, right? Plus, biochar has many advantages, many applications. So, if we dispose of our waste by converting it into biochar, if we convert our waste into biochar, and biochar is used for various things, well, that is an example of sustainable waste management, right? And that is why government is promoting the usage and production of biochar. Okay, so this first topic would be focused on the applications of biochar. How is biochar useful? Clear? So let's talk about this. Okay, so use of biochar as carbon sink. So remember this. Well, agricultural waste or solid municipal waste, which is generated from urban areas, okay, human excreta and other types of organic waste, when it is burned, okay, without oxygen, it produces biochar. Now biochar is a porous charcoal like product. Okay, now biochar has various applications. It has applications in agriculture, it has applications in construction sector, it has application in wastewater management, many applications. So let's talk about the uses of biochar in various fields. Okay, first let's talk about benefits of biochar in agriculture. Okay, first of all, biochar can be applied to soil. Okay, biochar, if applied to soil, can absorb carbon from the atmosphere, thereby act as a carbon sink. Biochar can hold carbon in the soil for 100 to 1000 years. So it's a good form of carbon sink. Plus, the other thing about application of biochar on soil is, well, it enhances the organic nutrients in your soil. Okay, which helps your crops and improves the yield of your crops. Okay, so if you apply biochar to your soil, it basically enhances its fertility by renewing, replenishing it with organic matter. Okay, so first it acts as a carbon sink, then it adds organic nutrients to your soil, then it also helps in water retention. If biochar is applied to soil, well, then that soil has more capacity to hold water. This again helps your crops, right? And it is especially useful in areas where, well, there is not much rainfall, okay, dry and semi-dry areas, right? So applying biochar can improve water retention. This is again very important. Then another thing is, well, when you apply nitrogen-based fertilizers to your soil for your crops like urea and many other nitrogenous fertilizers, right? Now this process also has a disadvantage, and that is, well, when you apply nitrogen based fertilizers to your soil basically performs some chemical reactions. Okay, those chemical reactions can be grouped in the category of denitrification or nitrification. Okay, now all of this releases nitrous oxides into the atmosphere. So when you apply nitrogenous fertilizers in your soil, that leads to release of nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. Now nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas which is stronger than even carbon dioxide. It has 273 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. Okay, so this is a dangerous thing. This can become a major contributor towards global warming, right? Not anymore, because with the application of biochar on soil, nitrous oxide release is also curtailed. Okay, so it's a win-win situation. It helps farmers, okay, and the other thing is it helps our fight against climate change. And number 3, well, sustainable waste management, right? So these are the benefits of biochar in agriculture. Now let's talk about other benefits. Okay, so biochar application in other areas. First of all, adding 2.5 to 5%, 2 to 5% of biochar to concrete can improve mechanical strength, increase heat resistance by 20%, and capture 115 kg of CO2 per cubic meter. That is why biochar is being used in construction industry. Because in construction you use concrete. If in that concrete you mix 2 to 5% of biochar, well, you can gain these things. Okay, your constructed building can absorb carbon dioxide, so that's a good thing. Then it can be used in wastewater management. A lot of wastewater is generated. A kilogram of biochar along with other substances can treat 200 to 500 liters of wastewater. So wastewater treatment is basically cheap, cost effective with the usage of biochar. Okay, it is a sustainable and cost-effective way of treating wastewater. Clear? And last, the biggest benefit of biochar application is, well, sustainable waste management. Why? Because India generates over 600 million metric tons of agricultural residue and over 60 million tons of municipal solid waste every year. If you convert all of this, okay, if you convert all of this to biochar, you can save a lot on air pollution. You won't release those toxic gases which you were releasing by burning this waste, okay? And you would also save on carbon emissions, right? Plus, while producing biochar, you also produce certain byproducts. So along with biochar, certain other bioproducts are produced, okay? One is syngas, synthetic gas. Synthetic gas is basically a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. And this can be used in areas, or this syngas can be used to produce electricity. So this is one benefit. Then, along with biochar, you also get bio oils. These bio oils can be used to replace petrol and diesel. So this would reduce our dependency on fossil fuels as well. So it's a win-win proposition when it comes to biochar. Make sense, right? Now there are some challenges in biochar production. Those are the same challenges, okay, which are there in all the other sectors as well, like policy paralysis, policy flip-flop, okay, not much material is available, and many other challenges, okay. Those 2-3 challenges are mentioned in your notes. Just go through them, okay, just once. Clear? But these facts, these applications about biochar, you should remember, okay. It can really help you in your mains answer writing when you will be writing answers on climate change or fight against climate change. Clear? All right. Now let's move forward to next news item, and that is Glacial Lake Outburst Flood. Okay. Now recently the thing is that it was believed, many people are speculating right now. We all know that flash floods occurred in Uttarkashi district of Uttarakhand, and many people have died because of that, and many people have lost, well, lives, property, and many other things, right? Now, many experts are speculating on the reasons behind this natural disaster, okay? Some are saying cloudburst, some are saying, well, topography was such that it led to flash floods, and some are saying that it might have been vulnerable to glacial lake outbursts. Now the question is, what are glacial lake outburst floods? How are they formed? Okay, how are they linked to climate change, right? And how can we protect ourselves from them? Clear? These things have to be talked about because India is preparing towards disaster resilience. So we need to talk about all these things. Clear? All right. Then let's talk about glacial lake outburst floods. Clear? GLOF. All right. Now, the thing is, you know about glaciers. You all know about glaciers. Okay. Now, these glaciers, what they do is they move very slowly. Basically, it's a river of ice that moves in the hilly areas, right? Extremely cold areas. Now, what happens is during summers or during hot seasons, okay, warm seasons, some of these glaciers melt, okay, and they form lakes. These lakes are known as glacier lakes. Clear? Now look at this. So this thing, let me use a different color. So this thing is the glacier, okay, it moves, and this area is the melted glacier. Clear? This area is the melted glacier, and this melted glacier has formed a lake, right? Now this lake is dammed by these walls which are known as moraines, glacial moraines. Okay, basically glaciers, when they travel, they erode the soil and rocks, all right, and they carry big boulders or rocks or soil along with them. This soil or these rocks, basically they create a wall around this lake. Okay, so basically this is the glacier, and these are the glacial lakes which are dammed, walled by these moraines. Now these moraines are weak as far as their structural strength is concerned, they're weak. And many a times when there is heavy rainfall or too much flow of water or too much melting that is happening, okay, it creates a lot of pressure as far as these waters are concerned. And because these moraines are weak as far as their structural strength is concerned, sometimes they break. There is a breach and water flows like anything with very high pressure, and this causes flooding. So when the walls are breached of these moraines, well, it causes flooding. Clear? This is, simply put, glacial lake outburst floods. And well, which areas are vulnerable to glacial lake outburst floods? Well, simply put, obviously, areas where there are glaciers, right? And which areas in India have glaciers? Mostly the Himalayan ranges. So these areas are vulnerable to glacial lake outburst floods. Clear? Makes sense? So this is glacier. Now my question is, and this is what the article also talked about, well, why are glacial lake outburst floods increasing in frequency and intensity? Why is there so many GLOFs happening right now? Okay, why is there an increase in these disasters related to glacial lakes? The thing is that experts have found out that glaciers are retreating, they are disappearing in the Himalayas because of global warming. Because of that, well, melting of glaciers is increasing. That is why the size of these glacial lakes is also increasing. Now, with the increase in size of these glacial lakes, what happens? There is high pressure on these moraines, right? So whenever there is too much pressure that these moraines cannot hold any more water, or there is heavy rainfall, or any other factor, or there is an earthquake which causes a rupture in this wall, then it leads to GLOF. Clear? But the problem is climate change, because climate change has led to increased size of these glacial lakes because glaciers are retreating. They are melting faster than before. Clear? This is the problem. Alright. Now, probably this happened in Uttarkashi, in Uttarakhand. Okay, we don't know. Experts will take some time to come out with the decisive list of reasons. Clear? Now, the thing is how to protect our population from these glacial lake outburst floods. Okay, what should we do? How to reduce the risk? First of all, we need to mapping of vulnerable areas. Okay, we need to do a proper mapping of vulnerable areas. We need to do a proper mapping of glacial lakes and how vulnerable each of these glacial lakes are. Okay, the moraines of each of these glacial lakes, how strong they are. We need to do a proper mapping, okay, and find out the vulnerable areas. Clear? Now we can use satellites for this, surveys for this. In fact, recently under NISAR mission, you remember NISAR mission, NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar. Now NISAR mission, this satellite has synthetic aperture radars. Synthetic aperture radars can very easily survey these glaciers and glacial lakes. So we need to first do mapping of vulnerable areas, right? Next is develop proper early warning systems. Okay, proper early warning systems so that populations or so that, areas, urban areas, rural areas can be vacated beforehand, before the actual flooding occurs. Okay, so we need to develop proper early warning systems, and work is being done on that in that regard. Third is, build disaster resilient infrastructure. So your roads, bridges, houses, they should be flood proof. Okay, so that you can protect your population from loss of you can protect key infrastructure sites from flooding. Clear? So build disaster resilient infrastructure, but build that disaster resilient infrastructure in those areas which are more prone to GLOF, and that can be done after mapping of vulnerable areas. Clear? So these three things, these three major things can help in significant risk reduction, loss of lives, reduction in loss of lives, loss of property. Make sense? All right. Now let's move forward to third news item, and that is Rohingya refugees. Okay. So who are Rohingyas basically? Look, the thing is that, well, there is a state in Myanmar which borders Bangladesh also. Okay, and it's a coastal state that is known as Rakhine state. Now, Myanmar basically is a Buddhist majority country, but in this Rakhine state, there are ethnic Muslims known as Rohingyas. Now, Myanmarese people don't consider them to be Myanmaris, they consider them to be Bangladeshi migrants who migrated 200-300 years ago in their territory of Rakhine. Clear? Now, many years back, well, there was this ethnic conflict between local tribes of Myanmar and these Rohingyas. And there was proper violent persecution of Rohingyas. That is why many Rohingyas had to migrate. They had to flee Rakhine state of Myanmar. And they settled in refugee camps of Bangladesh. They settled in India. They went on boats to Thailand, Indonesia, all over the place. Okay, but they were fleeing Myanmar. Clear? Make sense? Now, most of the refugees, most of the Rohingya refugees are in Bangladesh, but there are some Rohingya refugees in India as well. Now, the problem in India is that India does not have any law that regulates refugees. In fact, India does not have any law that defines the word refugees. Clear? India only has two categories: migrants, okay, illegal migrants who came without any visa, proper paperwork and all that. Okay, India does not categorize anyone to be refugees. Indian law does not allow refugees. Okay, so all refugees coming to India, well, they are categorized as illegal migrants only. Clear? Now, a petition was filed in Supreme Court, basically persuading Supreme Court, or basically asking Supreme Court to categorize Rohingyas as refugees. And if Supreme Court categorizes Rohingyas as refugees, well, then what are the rights and privileges of refugees in India? Because Indian law is silent. Indian law does not talk about refugees. Okay, we don't talk about refugees. So why would we talk about rights and privileges of refugees, right? So Indian legal system is silent on it, and that is why Supreme Court is trying to pitch in to define to basically define refugees, okay, who are refugees and what rights and privileges they have. That's the issue. All right. So let's talk about this. Rohingya refugees. So as you can see, this is Myanmar and this is Bangladesh and this is Rakhine state, the one in red. And this orange is Bangladeshi territory of Cox's Bazar. Many Rohingyas of Rakhine state had to flee to different places and many of them settled in refugee camps of Cox's Bazar. Now, what is the issue? Clear? The thing is that there is a refugee convention, UN Refugee Convention, United Nations Refugee Convention, under which the definition of the term refugee is given by UN. Okay, and along with that, in this convention, the rights and obligations of refugees is also given. Clear? So all the countries that have signed this refugee convention, well, should have these rights and obligations for the refugees seeking refuge in their territory. Clear? Now you should know this. India did not sign this convention. India did not sign, and if India did not sign, well, India never ratified it. Okay? So India is not bound by this UN Refugee Convention. Clear? Now, what is the situation in India? There is no law in India that defines the term refugees. Despite the fact that there are so many refugees in India, there are many Tibetan refugees in India, right? There are many, Afghan refugees in India. There are Rohingyas in India. There are Sri Lankan refugees in India. Okay, there are so many refugees in India, but India does not define the term refugee. Okay, the only definition that India has for people who have come to India without any paperwork or visa is that of illegal migrants. Okay, and as per that definition, well, any person who has migrated to India without any paperwork, or that person has overstayed his visa. His visa was for 1 year and he's been living in India for 10 years. In that case, that person will be illegal migrant. Okay, now as per Citizenship Act, remember this, as per Citizenship Act 1955, India is allowed to deport these illegal migrants. Clear? But now you will say there are so many Tibetan refugees, Afghan refugees, Sri Lankan refugees living in India. They are living in India. Why doesn't India deport them? Well, in 2011 and even before that, well, Indian government knew that these people are refugees, so Indian government allowed long-term visas for them so that they can apply for long-term visas even if they don't have paperwork and stay in India without the citizenship. Nonetheless, India does not define the term refugees. India does not categorize these people as refugees. And, well, if they are not categorized as refugees, how can they get rights and all? In fact, for Rohingyas, India has not even granted long-term visas to many Rohingyas as well. We consider them as illegal migrants as per Indian law. Clear? That is why a case has been filed in Supreme Court to basically ascertain the status of Rohingyas, whether they are refugees or illegal migrants, and if they are refugees, then what are their rights and privileges. Clear? That's about it. And now let's talk about the last news item, and that is gerrymandering. Okay, now what is gerrymandering? Basically, you all know about the elections in India. Okay, for elections of parliament or state legislative assembly, the entire country or the entire state is divided into constituencies, and a representative is chosen by the people from each constituency, which represents those people in parliament or state legislative assembly. Right? That's the thing. But what if there is a political party that gets to know that, well, there are some voters who would never vote for them. Okay? And because these people would never vote for them, well, we can lose elections. A political party can think that way. Right? So what does that political party do? That political party redraws the constituencies. Okay? It basically redraws the map of those constituencies in such a way that these voters who would never vote for them, well, they are either concentrated in 1 or 2 seats only, or they are separated so that they are in minority in every seat. Basically, you are dividing the constituencies in such a way so as to gain electoral advantage, because you know your voters are in these places, so you divide constituencies in such a way that your voters are in majority in every constituency. Right? This is known as gerrymandering. Okay? And it happens a lot in USA. It doesn't happen that much in India, but it happens a lot in USA. And I'll tell you why. Because India has constitutional safeguards to prevent gerrymandering, but USA does not have those safeguards. Okay? Make sense? So that is the issue. Clear? So let's talk about gerrymandering. Now, the reason why gerrymandering was in the news was because currently in USA, the Democrat Party is accusing Donald Trump's party, that is Republican Party, of gerrymandering in the state of Texas. And that has become a big issue. Okay? That is why it was in the news, and we are discussing gerrymandering. Clear? Now, the term gerrymandering, do you know how this term originated? Okay? Well, the thing is that in USA, the governor of a state can redraw constituencies. Clear? So if a governor of a state belongs to Democrat Party, well, he will redraw the map in such a way that Democrats win, and vice versa in case of Republicans. Okay, that is the case in USA. Okay, do you know how this term originated? In 1812, there was a governor whose last name was Gary, whatever way it was pronounced. Now he redrew a political constituency in such a way, okay, he drew the map of a political constituency in such a way that it was so weird looking at it on the map, okay. It looked like a salamander, a fish. And that is why newspapers of that day, in those days, called it gerrymander. And that's where this term originated. So gerrymandering comes from this governor of a state in USA, Gerry, and he drew a constituency in such a way that it looked like a salamander. So gerrymandering, that's how it is. Okay. Now, how do you perform gerrymandering? You understand the basic point, na? You redraw the constituency in such a way that, well, your supporters are in majority and your naysayers, people who do not support you and people who support opposition political party, they are in minority, so that they don't win that political constituency. Okay. Now, there are two tactics of doing gerrymandering. Okay. One is called packing. So you basically concentrate all your opposition voters into 1-2 constituencies. You draw it in such a way into 1-2 constituencies, okay, so that your opposition party only gets 1-2 seats and you get majority of the seats. That is packing. So you concentrate them in 1-2 seats. Cracking means you divide constituencies in such a way that your opposition voters are just 10% of the population in every constituency, so they can never win, right? This is cracking. Clear? So packing and cracking, that's the way it is. Clear? Now, the reason why gerrymandering is so easy in USA is because, well, drawing of political constituencies is the job of the executive. Okay, so at the top level, it's the president, the head of the executive. At the state level, it's the governor. Basically, the power lies with the governor of a state to draw the constituencies. Okay. Now, if he basically belongs to one political party and he's hell-bent on winning, well, then he'll redraw the constituencies in such a way that his political party wins. That's the idea. Okay. So it is the job of the executive to draw political constituencies, right? That is not the case in India, and that is why gerrymandering is not that popular in India, or does not happen that much in India, because India has a proper procedure. What is that procedure? First of all, Article 82 and 170 clearly say that constituencies shall be redrawn after every census. And if you are not doing it after every census, you need a constitutional amendment to avoid that. Clear? Plus, no random minister can do this gerrymandering. Okay? If you want to draw the political constituencies, you have to pass a law in Parliament to constitute a delimitation commission. This delimitation commission shall contain retired judges and Election Commission of India officials. So after every census, delimitation commission will be formed, which will have these members, and it would be their job to draw constituencies, right? So no politician is involved in this, and they try to keep this process transparent, and they also basically receive public inputs as well. So because of transparency, there is no, well, as they say, gerrymandering in a sense, or there is no redrawing of political constituencies in a bad spirit, okay, in a bad way, okay. Unfair advantage, to gain unfair advantage, basically that is avoided because of transparency. And generally our constitution is very clear that population should be the only criteria to decide the boundaries of constituencies. No other criteria shall be taken into account. Clear? So that is how we avoid it, through parliamentary law, through constitutional provisions. Clear? So we are lucky in that way, that our democracy is not victim to gerrymandering, which is not the case in USA. American democracy is a little flawed in that regard. Okay? And that would be all. With that, we conclude today's session. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I'm sure it has added value to your preparation. But it would add more value, I say this every time, if you revise this lecture. Okay, so please do not forget to revise this, and I shall see you next time with another set of news items. Thank you, everyone.